down by the Clown Cafe, your favorite meals on wheels. The menu is disgusting and it's full of special deals. Nothing here is good for you, so grab yourself a tray, 'cause food's a little funny at the Clown Cafe. Drop on by the Clown Cafe. Drop on.
All right, that's enough of that. I don't want to have this video get pulled for copyright infringement. Welcome. It is episode 3 of the Gory Hole. If I had sound effects, this is where I would use them. But alas, like I said last episode, we still don't have all the fancy bells and whistles. But we're getting there. You might notice that I look a little different today. I'm going to kind of ease y'all into the fact I shaved my big-ass beard off, only to then wear a fake one. I don't know. It felt right. In any case, we're dressing up like my boy, Art the Clown, Santa Claus edition. I thought that would be fun because I feel like from behind, people would probably be like, oh my God, that's sacrilegious. You're dressing up as Santa Claus on Halloween. How could you do that? And then I'll turn around and be like, surprise, I'm actually a murderous Santa Claus. So it works. Yeah, if you're back, again, really appreciate it. Got some really fun movies to talk about today. We're going to be talking about The Town That Dreaded Sundown, the original that came out in the 70s, and then we're also going to be talking about the 2014 remake. We are also going to be talking about The Prowler. Yes, another Tom Savini gem. Story-wise, leaves a little to be desired, if I'm being completely honest with you. We'll get into that, but the kills are phenomenal. And then, we're going to delve into Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Cure, which is a really fun, it's kind of like a neo-noir kind of detective film that has this weird kind of hypnotic kind of aspect to it that I really enjoyed. But I guess to start, it is Halloween, so I wanted to share with you my 5 favorite films to watch every Halloween. I don't always watch all of these on Halloween, but these are usually the 5 that I will run through. Let's get into it. First off, and again, I'm dressed like a clown, right? So this might work for some of y'all because this first one is going to be a controversial pick, so maybe you guys are going to be like, this guy's a fucking clown. And look at me. My first number 1 all-time favorite movie to watch on Halloween. I pretty regularly watch this every Halloween. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Why is this a controversial pick? I feel like it's widely hated because it's the only Halloween movie that doesn't have Michael Myers in it. And I know, if you've never heard of this movie, you might be listening to this and being like, a Halloween movie without Michael Myers, that doesn't make any sort of fucking sense. And you're entitled to your opinion, however wrong I think it may be. The full history of the Halloween series, for those who are not familiar, is after John Carpenter created the original, his kind of idea for the series was to return to it, intermittently and have it be more of an anthology. He wanted to just have each movie be completely different, almost seasons of American Horror Story or episodes of American Horror Stories. The one link was going to be that Halloween is where each movie took place. So it was going to kind of just have, weird kind of fucked up stories that all took place on Halloween. I love that idea. I think it's a way to keep the series very fresh. There are really good Halloween sequels past the original that have Michael Myers in it. So it's kind of like rock in a hard place. I don't necessarily want to erase those, but at the same time, I do wish Halloween 3 had done better critically, because it would have meant that we probably would have gotten more of that anthology series. And I feel like as time went on, the horror community has been very gracious towards that anthology storytelling format. I just think it was, with how popular Michael Myers was, having a movie come out without him in it with the title Halloween, people were just going to hate that on sight. The general story of it follows Dr. Dan Chalice, played by the wonderful Tom Atkins, Dude just exudes badassery, and also looks like someone who could just, barbecue the fuck out of some meat. Like, he gives off, like, big dick dad energy, all right? Tom Atkins, man, what a star of these, like, B-grade horror movies. He's in another one that I'll probably talk about on a later episode called Night of the Creeps that is just phenomenal. But anytime Tom Atkins pops up, the movie is always going to be good just because he's in it. But yeah, it follows this doctor. Patient comes in one night clutching a jack-o'-lantern mask, and he is all sorts of freaked out because he's, says he's being chased and, that they're going to get him. They don't know what he's talking about, so they put him in a room, hook him up to some IVs, and then, they keep him overnight for observation. While, the nurses and the doctors are out of the room, this mysterious man in a suit comes in. And great special effects scene. He kind of, like, grabs his face and suffocates him to death, but he kind of, like, pinches his nose and pulls up on it, and you get this great, shot of his nose kind of, like, breaking. It looks really cool. And then, yeah, so he kills the guy. Nurse comes in. She starts screaming. The guy in the suit runs out. Dr. Dan Chalice to the rescue. He starts chasing the guy down the hallway. The guy runs out to his car. He pours gasoline all over himself and lights himself on fire. Car explodes. So you're like, well, the killer's dead, but, like, there's still, like, an hour plus movie left. So, like, obviously there's something bigger going on here. We'll do a bigger deep dive into this episode or into this movie on a later date. But outside of Tom Atkins, you get a great villain by the name of Colonel Cochran in this movie. He is a mask maker in a secluded town in California, owns and operates the Silver Shamrock Mask Company. And his devious little plot is not really to kill what most horror movies are aiming to kill. Your teenagers, your adults, right? This dude wants to kill as many children as possible. And that's where this movie gets its really, like, kind of sinister undertone. And I feel like where most horror movies kind of have, like, a general, like, we don't kill kids kind of rule. Obviously, there's more horror movies outside of Halloween 3 that break this kind of rule. But Halloween 3, I just feel like the master plan of this guy is so sinister. So he's definitely up there for one of the most evil characters in horror for me. And a great performance, too. But yeah, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. If you've seen it and you hate it, odds are, I don't know you, maybe you've watched it 3 or 4 times and you are comfortable saying that you hate this movie. But most people watched it one time back in the day when they were doing, like, a Halloween marathon on AMC Fear Fest or something like that. They saw Michael Myers wasn't in it, and they wrote it off originally. If that describes you, I implore you to give it one more shot and just go into it with that anthology series in mind, that original kind of idea for the Halloween series. I feel like if this movie was released without the Halloween title attached to it, it would probably be a classic today. It has gained its audience, though. And for the people out there who support Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, I fuck with you. Thank you. You are always friends of the Gory Hole. Number 2, The Burning. This is, I don't want to say underrated because it's definitely got its audience, but I feel like in the category of, summer camp slashers, everyone's always talking about, Jason, maybe Victor Crowley from the Hatchet series, if that kind of fits. But I don't see a lot of widely talked about, love for my boy Cropsy, the the main antagonist in this movie. The Burning follows, it kind of opens with a group of kids, and there's a groundskeeper on this camp who, is kind of weird, and, they all like to bully and prank him and stuff like that. So they set up this prank to kind of, like, scare him, and they, like, light this little fire in his window or something like that. And when he wakes up, he kind of freaks out, and the fire, wasn't the plan of the kids to murder him, but the fire kind of spreads, and then he gets trapped in his, little groundskeeper cabin, and he burns alive. And then we have a time jump, same camp, years later. It's pretty basic storyline. The kids are all, going to summer camp, and then they start dying. I really enjoy the killer's weapon in this. It's like a pair of gardening shears that are used very, very effectively in a lot of kills. The best kill in this movie is when the kids are all on like a little canoe in the middle of the lake. It's almost like the Jason jumping out of the water scene on steroids, because you get that jumping out of the water aspect to it, the killer suddenly appearing, but then you get some gruesome ass kills. I mean, there's a great shot of the shears cutting off the fingers of this kid's hand, and then, blood starts spurting out. You get a great shot of the shears being just jammed into this kid's throat, and it's great movie. Also, side note, if anyone has ever wanted to see what my boy George Costanza looked like back in the day with hair, Jason Alexander is in a relatively starring role in this movie as a camp counselor. And yeah, it's always crazy to see, big actors pop up in, early low-budget horror movies. Fisher Stevens is also in this movie. He's in a lot of stuff, but most recently I feel like I saw him in Succession. As just, one of the family's kind of like investor kind of characters. But Fisher Stevens is always great, and when I watched this movie recently, he's so young in it that I was like, who is this man? And then I looked it up. I was like, no fucking way. So yeah, great performance from Fisher Stevens. We also have, next up, Pumpkinhead. Now, Pumpkinhead is a great, probably next to Halloween Season 3, or Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, like the most Halloween themed of these movies on the list. Follows a, lead character. His son is murdered by these kind of like dirt bike riders, and then he kind of like swears to you make some kind of deal with this like pumpkin creature, and then this massive pumpkin head fucking monster just starts picking them off one by one, and he so get a great creature feature out of Pumpkinhead, and I mean the design is insane. Just this big monstrous pumpkin ripping people to shreds. So shout out to Pumpkinhead. I think there's like 4 or like 5 of them. So I mean there's definitely a great series here, but the first one is definitely the best one. Now, next up, I've thrown our first classic in the mix, because sometimes classics are classics for a reason, right? Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. Absolutely love this movie. I feel like, if I gun to my head, I'm either going to pick Part 4 or Part 6 as my favorite. I think Part 4 probably has, like, the best, like, storyline. I feel like Corey Feldman's, like, younger, Tommy Jarvis performance is a little bit more effective and probably one of the more dramatic takes in the series. But if we're just going for good old-fashioned fun, I'm going to pick Jason Lives every time. It's the first one where Jason turns into a zombie, which is great. Brought back to life by being electrocuted, almost like a Frankenstein's monster type thing, too. You get some great side characters. The cop with the fucking gaudy-ass laser on his gun that's like, wherever the red light shoots, it go bang. Like, terrible line, but I mean, it's delivered so cheesy that I absolutely love it. So, Friday the 13th, Jason Lives, is definitely up there for one of my favorite Halloween watches. You also get, a great original song from Alice Cooper. I think it's called The Man Behind the Mask. Great song. I miss the days of like when Dokken was, making music for Nightmare on Elm Street 3 and Alice Cooper was putting out music for Jason Lives. Like, I just miss when metal bands were doing that. And shout out to Ice Nine Kills with their most recent song. They're definitely bringing that back, which I really enjoy. I hope more bands make horror movie music in the future. And number 5, got some H.P. Lovecraft style horror here with one of my favorite body horror films, Reanimator. So we're going to do a much bigger deep dive into Reanimator at a later date. But Reanimator basically follows a doctor who has acquired this kind of like serum, if you will, that reanimates life. Anything he injects it into comes back to life. Doesn't even need to be like a fully formed body. At some points you see him just inject it into a head and the head will come back to life. You get some, really good body horror, body parts moving on their own. It's part zombie, like I said, part H.P. Lovecraft. It has some Frankenstein, kind of feel to it. It's very genre bending in that way. So definitely check out Reanimator. And just to get through that list real quickly so we can get into the movies that we're going to discuss today. Those are probably my top 5, movies to watch on Halloween. I probably obviously left some out that are obvious choices to watch on Halloween, but I wanted to kind of help shed some light on either some, slept on ones, some overhated ones, or just ones that I just fucking love, right? Let's get into it. The Town That Dreaded Sundown. So you've got the original from the 70s. And I guess to start, this is a series that is based on a group of actual murders that happened in Texarkana in the 40s, called the Moonlight Murders. I think the killer was dubbed like the Phantom Killer. To be honest with you, I don't know if that's just like, some embellishing on the movie's part or if that was really what they were calling the killer at the time. But in the movie, the killer's called the Phantom Killer, right? And it was a group of unsolved murders of couples that, got killed, over the span of I think it was like 2 years in the 40s, right? The movie, at least the one that came out in the 70s, kind of takes the approach of being like, this actually happened before you watch it, right? So it's one of those early kind of like Blair Witch vibes, but at the same time, it's like actually based on real murders, so it feels even more real. So a lot of the horror in it is very effective. I did really enjoy like some of the creative choices in it. They probably, didn't show a lot of the violence because of the limitations they had at the time when this movie came out. But I feel like there were really creative, choices throughout the movie that while you couldn't see the violence, like some of the choices really just made it so you could feel the violence. So absolutely loved that. Opening scene, right? One, you've got really like creepy, sinister voiceover throughout the whole movie. It's, this man in this kind of like monotone voice, just kind of, explaining the setting, be like, it was just after World War II, like, soldiers were coming home, like really setting the scene for the movie to help you kind of be like, okay, this is what was happening at the time. Opening scene, we've got our first couple. They drive out into, a secluded area to kind of get hot and heavy, so to speak, and then our Phantom Killer appears. He's wearing just like a sack over his face with 2 eye holes cut out. I don't know if this was like basically the inspiration for Friday the 13th Part 2, Jason's original, design. But it definitely feels like that was the inspiration, because I know, like, in Friday the 13th Part 2, he just has 1 eye hole, and, in this one he has 2. But outside of that, I mean, the killer looks like the same design as Jason in Friday the 13th Part 2. But you've got, the killer comes up, he smashes, the window, and he pulls the guy out. Now, this is where you get, again, one of my favorite scenes in the movie of kind of showcasing violence without actually seeing anything, because after he's dragged out and the girl is still sitting in the car, you get this great camera angle of like her POV leaning back in the passenger seat, looking at the window, and you just see blood dripping from the broken glass. And I feel like, at least for me, I'm like, ooh, I can feel the cuts all over my legs that this guy has, that he got when he was pulled out. And the camera kind of hangs on that shot for a while. So it really lets like that kind of disturbing imagery soak into your mind, so to speak. After that, the girl's kind of pulled out. We see her kind of like laying by the side of the road later. It's revealed that both of them did survive. They're just kind of in comas. But they were brutally attacked. They are not in good shape. There's this one really, really effective line of dialogue when the lead detective of the film, is kind of walking with the doctor, and the doctor's like explaining, he's like, yeah, the body appears to have been gnawed on the breasts and the back and the legs, and then the detective's like, gnawed on? And then the doctor looks at him and goes, literally chewed. And that delivery of the literally chewed line is just like, ooh, sends shivers down your back. I mean, you can even see, the guy playing the detective is really, really effective there, because you see his eyes kind of widen and be like, oh, fuck. But yeah, the continued voiceover throughout the movie, I feel like, makes the character deaths hit a little harder. What I mean by that is the movie will just introduce your next victims, right? They have not been in the movie thus far, but the movie will be like, this is Tim. He owns his own company. He fought in the war and now he's back. This is his girlfriend. They plan on getting married. Like, you'll get this whole backstory for these characters, and then they drive into a secluded area and they are promptly, taken out, right? So I feel like that use of voiceover in this, some people might consider it just like constant exposition dump and lazy storytelling, which I can see that argument, but for me, I feel like it just makes, when you're watching these random characters that otherwise would have been throwaway characters, I feel like the way the voiceover establishes their backstory kind of makes the death hit a little harder. At least it did for me. I don't know. It would kind of be like if, a Friday the 13th movie, right? They all show up to camp, and then there's voiceover, which is like, this is Sally. Her favorite color is pink. She's going to study law when she moves to college. She's got a boyfriend that she plans on marrying. Like, if these movies, like, gave you all that backstory, then maybe when Sally goes to the outhouse to go to the bathroom and gets a machete in her face, you'd be like, oh no, her favorite color's pink, not Sally. Like, I just, that's kind of what I'm getting at, right? The voiceover just makes the kills a little more effective. With some of the kill sequences in the 70s movie, while you don't actually see a lot of the violence, like I was saying, you just get some gorgeous kind of like super wide camera angles. There's a scene where the cop is kind of driving the back roads and he hears gunshots. And it's the killer, right? And he's just, committed some illegal activities, so to speak. And the cop kind of is chasing him. Side note, the police chases in this movie are some of the slowest police chases you've ever seen. It's kind of hilarious. But in any case, when he comes up upon one of the victims, she is tied with a belt around a tree. And you can see bite marks on her back, but it's this nice wide shot where you see him come in from the left side of the screen, and you see at the far right of the screen the victim tied up to the tree. And it's really, really well filmed sequence. It's kind of raining and stormy, and it looks really, really good. And there's a lot of these camera shots throughout the movie, so it's just, it's really, just well filmed film. Well-filmed film, yeah. You get, kind of some tropes that you see in later horror films or thriller detective films. These, local cops are getting nowhere with the case, so enter a legendary lawman who's brought in from the FBI to help catch the killer. He, with the help of the lead detective on the case, are kind of like our main characters. You just see them kind of driving around, taking in leads and stuff like that for the rest of the film. You get a really funny kind of comic relief character in the the kind of driver for the detective and the lawman from the FBI. His name is Sparkplug, and Sparkplug is kind of just like this bumbling character. Like, you see him the first sequence where he's driving the police officers to a crime scene. He's driving like so aggressively fast and like sliding all over the road, and there's no reason for it. At one point they make him go undercover as like a woman with another cop who is they drive to a secluded area trying to kind of like bait the killer out to kind of attack them. It doesn't work, but you get a really funny sequence with Sparkplug dressed as a woman, and all the cops are kind of like making fun of him, telling him he looks cute and stuff. I thought that was pretty funny. You get some really good like killer breathing in this movie, similar to like that of Halloween. And I think this movie came out a few years before Halloween, so maybe that was like some inspiration. But yeah, I mean, there's scenes where you can just hear the killer just breathing, and it's very, very effective. And then the scenes where you see the killer as he's breathing, you just see that sack kind of like inhaling into his mouth, exhaling, and he's just breathing super aggressively. So that's a really effective way to kind of like send some chills down your back. Now, I like that as each kill scene kind of progresses, you get to see him do more. What I mean by that is like the first, victim that survived, right? You find her body on the side of the road. The second victim, you find her tied up with the belt. Now, this third victim, you see him pull the belt out, tie her up, you see him bite. Like, you get to, like, the movie slowly shows you what his kind of ritual is, which is really, really effective. Now, oh, yes, here we are. One of my favorite parts. The trombone scene. So, trombone scene's probably the most famous scene from this movie. Killer ties this girl up to a tree, and then he ties a knife to the trombone, right? And then he gets up behind her and he starts to play the trombone, right? And he's got the knife like on the extendo part, and he's just blowing into the trombone, playing it very poorly. This guy is not a trained professional when it comes to trombone playing. But you just see him kind of extending it, the knife hitting the girl in the back. But again, this is probably one of the most effective parts of the movie where you feel like you are getting stabbed yourself, because you don't actually see the knife go in. You see shots of him blowing aggressively into the trombone, extending it and kind of grunting, and then you hear just like the knife hitting. And then you hear screams, you get a shot of the knife coming back with blood dripping on it, and then just over and over and over again. It kind of reminded me of like the meat hook scene from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when you see her get thrown on the meat hook and it cuts away right before, and so you don't actually see it, but you feel it. But with how much this knife just keeps going in and out, it just feels like that meat hook scene, but over and over and over again. So just really, really effective. Now, there's a little bit of a time jump. Like I was saying, you get to see, after the time jump, the killer kind of changes his MO. He attacks and murders a couple in the house. This is probably the most violent scene of the movie. He kills a dude named Floyd via gunshot. And then there's a great sequence where his wife is standing in the kitchen, and there's a long hallway where she can see the front door. And it's just kind of a screen door, and the killer kind of just like both hands just kind of pulls the door down, and just like very violently and grunting as he does it. And it's a great shot of the killer. And then you see him shoot her in the face. Probably, like I said, the most violent scene of the movie. So you get a bullet hole right in her cheek, and then it's almost if he shoots her again, but then she's like crawling. She's crawling away, which is kind of funny because she gets shot in the face. So I don't know how she is surviving this, but she's crawling away. And yeah, I don't know how she did this with 2 bullets to the face. After this sequence, you kind of see that the town continue to adjust to the crimes. They're boarding up windows, you know, so you get a really good display of like that gradual fear of the town kind of like, you know, just continuing to grow, and that hysteria. And, you know, this was a town where, you know, people left their doors unlocked, and then now, like, they're all boarding up, locking their doors. People are not talking to strangers. Like, so it's really, really affecting how people are carrying on about their day-to-day lives, which totally makes sense. Now, I would say this is kind of where we get to the end of the movie. You see the cops get a call about a car. The lead, you know, the detective from the town is like, I remember chasing that car from that earlier sequence in the movie where he was chasing the killer. They go up to the car. They start investigating the woods, and that's where they see the killer. They start to chase the killer, but the killer kind of like jumps across the train tracks. The lawman leans under the train and shoots him with a shotgun, but when they get to the other side of the train, he is gone. So the killer kind of vanishes, and then the movie just kind of ends with it being like, you know, some think the killer bled out in the woods and died, and his body was never found. Some people think he was a citizen of Texarkana and continued to live there. But the movie kind of ends with a movie theater with a billboard that shows that it's showing the town that dreaded sundown. So now there's a movie within the movie, right? And throughout the movie, you get shots of an ominous character with the same shoes. And as the viewer, you're like, okay, this is the killer, right? You get the final sequence of this movie is a man in line for the movie, and all you see are his shoes. It's the same shoes. And then the movie ends. So you're like, oh, he's still there. Enter The Town That Dreaded Sundown 2014. Now, this is kind of like a meta-horror sequel. The movie takes place in Texarkana with, you know, all the characters living in, you know, the world where the movie from the 70s is real, and it's kind of like a, you know, exaggeration of what actually happened. Movie opens with a group of kids at a drive-in. They're going to, everyone's there watching. You've got the priest who's walking around being like, this movie's heresy. You know, you guys should leave. Don't watch this. It's ungodly. And then you've got our main characters, Corey, and then I believe Jamie, right? So Corey and Jamie. Jamie's clearly very uncomfortable, and Corey's like, look, if you don't want to watch this movie, we can just leave. So they leave. They go to the woods to start kind of making out, you know. And then that is when the Phantom appears. And it kind of mirrors the opening of the original, which is probably intentional. Now, they're pulled out of the car. The killer puts Corey on the ground and tells Jamie to turn around and not look. And then that is when, through shadows, you just see Corey getting stabbed to death, right? And Jamie kind of like turns around, and the killer looks up, and he's like, you looked, and then he starts chasing her. It's a really, that you looked line is very, very effective. The killer also talks more in this opening scene than the killer in the previous one talked throughout the whole movie. And that is a continuing theme. Like, the killer just talks in this one. So that's a little different. Now, you kind of, after that murder, you get sequences of Jamie going to, like, Corey's funeral. His mom is, like, screaming at her, like, you left my son to die, which is not really fair. I mean, he was already dead at that point, and, you know, the killer started chasing her. So, yeah, you know, but the mom is grieving. I get it, right? One crucial thing, though, is the killer does kind of, like, knock down Jamie when he's chasing her, but he doesn't kill her. He just gets real close to her, and he says, this is for Mary, you make them remember. And then he leaves. And then so you're like, okay, this is kind of the mystery of the whole movie. Who is this Mary person? Like, what is, like, what does he want them to remember? You get some other great kill sequences as the movie, carries on. There's a sequence with a soldier coming home from Iraq. He is with his girlfriend. They're like making out. Then it cuts to them at a motel, and then he's like, "All right, I'm gonna go get some ice." And then that's when she pulls out a wedding ring with a bottle of champagne. So I don't know if this is a wedding ring that she found that he was going to propose to her, or if she is like going to propose to him. In any case, these people were going to get married. I say were because this guy does not come back, folks, from getting the ice. Unfortunately, she walks up to the window of the motel room, and that is when the killer appears holding his severed head. And this is your first instance of this movie where you're like, oh, fuck, this is a lot more violent, and like, oh, we're going to show you the violence. So, like, the first scene with Corey getting stabbed to death, you primarily hear it and see it with shadows. So at that point, you're like, oh, maybe they're still trying to do, like, that old school, like, make you feel it, but don't show it. And then you get a severed head thrown at you. So you're like, okay, no, they're not doing that. The killer gets into the motel room. That's when the woman jumps out of the motel room, and you get a really gruesome scene of her leg breaking, bone shooting out of her leg. She's limping to her car, and that's when the killer catches up to her, and you get this great sequence of him stabbing her to death in her car, and the blood, like, you get one shot of the driver's side window, and then blood just kind of splatters over it and covers it up, and then you get a camera angle of the trunk kind of back window, blood splatters over it, covers it up, kind of all around the car, passenger side, windshield, and until the car is just covered in blood, and you just keep hearing stabbing noises, but can't actually see anymore because it's so soaked in blood. So it's a very, very effective scene. You get, your sequences like that were in the original of the showing the town's ever-growing hysteria. You get a town hall meeting where they're all, giving their reasonings why the killings are happening. People are like, if we didn't keep showing that movie, this wouldn't be happening. All the stuff, yada, yada, yada. Following scene, we also get more backstory on Jamie, that her parents are both dead. She's been living with her grandma this whole time. She basically, when Jamie is talking to her grandma about this, she goes, and they never caught him. She was like, no. And she gives this really good line. She's like, you can't catch the boogeyman. You can't kill the boogeyman. His father is the devil, and his mother is a whore. Grandma was spitting with that line because it's very, very well delivered. But yeah, so Jamie's parents are dead. Jamie then decides to kind of take it upon herself to kind of investigate the killings. So she goes down to the filing office where they keep all the old police files of the original killings. That's where we meet the character of Nick. Nick went to high school with Jamie, and you can tell right away that he's kind of got a crush on her. He starts helping her look through the files, and then he starts showing up at her house with all these files. And, they get close, and then they're kind of like this duo, like, hunting down these, leads, so to speak. Now, there's a character in the original film, I think his name was Ben Ewing or something like that. You see him get arrested driving a stolen car, but it's kind of like, this guy's not the killer, like he doesn't fit the profile, but he does get thrown in jail because he has a stolen car. Now, in this movie, that's when his character's kind of expanded upon, so to speak. So a lot of people apparently thought that he was the killer because after he was arrested, the killings totally stopped. Now the cops tell Jamie, they're like, well, if you think it's Benjamin Ewing, he would be 60 years old. He's also dead. And then she's like, yeah, but he had a son that would visit him. Maybe it's his son. And then that's where they inform her, yeah, his son died in a bar fight. We already looked into that. So she's like, okay. You get some really good sequences after that with, kind of mimicking the original movie. Another lawman shows up to kind of help them catch the killer this time. It's Anthony Richardson. The role I always remember Anthony Richardson from is the friend opposite of Jerry O'Connell in Kangaroo Jack. He's also the one who tries to burn down the burger joint in Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle. But it's kind of fun seeing him in like a more serious kind of lawman role. So it's a great little cameo. Next, you see Jamie and Nick. They go to a vigil for Corey. That's when this a man in the Phantom hood kind of shows up, and before he can even do anything, Jamie sees him. The whole crowd kind of starts to spread, and then this citizen just shoots him to death. And then that's where they make announcements. They're like, "The killer's been caught. He showed up to the vigil. We shot him." But there's still like 45 minutes left of this movie, folks. So obviously they did not catch the killer. Next up, we get to see a gay couple. They go to, again, another secluded area of town to start hooking up, and that is when the Phantom Killer accosts them. Trombone scene, part 2 here. Now, this one takes the approach, again, of I'm going to show you everything, and it's pretty fucking brutal. You've got one kid that's just been beat to a pulp, and he's laying on the ground, and he has to watch as his boyfriend or lover, whatever, is tied up, and he just watches as the trombone knife is just plunged into his back, and then the kid laying on the ground is shot in the head. So, the killer is not dead, folks. Now, later on, Jamie is sent a mysterious email, supposedly from the Phantom Killer, basically telling her that he's not going to stop until, she makes them remember all this stuff, like the history of the town, like nobody cares, like all, it's very like Zodiac-esque, right? And she even says that. She's like, it's like the Zodiac. I think he's copying him. Later on, though, the police trace this email to that priest from the opening scene who was trying to get people to leave the movie. Apparently, he sent it from his email account. He never fully admits to it, but you can kind of tell by his eyes that he did send it. But he's not the killer, because he was kind of just trying to like scare people to kind of get the movie from stop being shown. So he's kind of interfering with an investigation there, but not the killer. So that's when Jamie and Nick interview the director of the original, or the son of the director of the original film, and he basically tells them that he knows who the killer is. And that's when you find out that after Benjamin Ewing was arrested, they did find one more body, but it was never reported about. It was a guy named Henry McCready, and he had a wife named Mary. Now, Mary never forgave the town because he wasn't in the movie. He didn't get a plaque, wasn't listed as one of the victims, but he was found chopped up on the train tracks, and she was certain that he was one of the victims. So Hank McCready had a grandson, and basically the director's like, it's his grandson, because he is like, the Mary basically like filled him with all this rage his entire life growing up about how the town turned their backs on him. So you're kind of like, oh, now we got to go hunt down the McCready grandson and see, like, is he the killer? Now, they're kind of they keep investigating. They go back to Jamie's house. Jamie and Nick end up having sex, and that's when Nick leaves the house, and then you see him being followed by the Phantom Killer. That is when Jamie plans to leave for college. So her and her grandma drive to a gas station to get some things before they drive out of town. She goes in. When she comes out, her grandmother's laying on the ground. She's been shot in the neck, and then she starts getting shot at, right? So now she's on the run from the killer again. He chases her. You get another chase sequence. She runs into the woods, and then she trips over some train tracks onto Nick's body. R.I.P. Nick. So Nick is dead. He's chopped up exactly like how they show the body of Hank McCready. So she keeps running. That's when she gets shot with an arrow in the leg, shot with an arrow in the shoulder, and now she's just kind of like laying on the ground. She's looking as the Phantom Killer is walking over to her, and then she looks over, and another Phantom Killer is walking towards her. The old two-killer twist. So the first killer kneels down, takes his hood off. It's one of the cops. Surprise. He's kind of just in the background for the movie. You get a few sequences of him interviewing Jamie, but yeah, so it's one of the cops, and then that's when he looks back at the other guy and is like, all right, show her. And then he pulls off the hood, and it's Corey, her boyfriend from the opening scene of the movie. And she's like, no, this can't be. I saw you die. And he's like, you didn't, though. You had your back turned. And that's when I feel like it's kind of like a clever little commentary on like how movies make you think you see things that you don't actually see. Because in this scene, when she has her back turned, you see a shot of the shadows of him being stabbed, right? And then you see a shot of her face with the stabbing happening in the background. But when Corey is revealed, you're like, wait, we did see that. But then you're like, oh, that shot of her face with what was happening in the background was her mind piecing together what she thought was happening. So we were actually seeing something that wasn't happening. So it was clever. I liked that. Now, Corey is kind of like going on this reasoning, like, I did all this because everyone expected me to be the star football. But honestly, it's pretty shitty reasoning. He said that everyone thought he was going to be the star football player, go off, play football, come back to the town and start a family. And he wanted to be a part of something more important. And that now that when people talk about when the Phantom Killer came back, he would know that he was a part of it. And then that's when the cop shoots him in the head. And Corey is actually dead this time. And then the cop reveals his master plan is he wants to be the one to catch the Phantom Killer. So he's going to frame Corey and he's going to frame Jamie as being the killers. Jamie is able to get a gun off the ground. The cop doesn't see. She shoots him dead. And then that's when, killers are dead. Movie kind of flash forwards to her at college, and she kind of gives this exposition dump explaining where her life has been since she moved away to college. Similar kind of like voiceover ending that the original had, because she's like, some people think that the killer is still out there, some people still think that I'm responsible, like yada yada yada. But then she's just like, the memory of the Phantom will never die, something like that. And that's when you see her walking down a secluded kind of parking lot to her car, I presume, and you see a shadowy figure following her. Movie ends. So yeah, folks, that's The Town That Dreaded Sundown, both the original and the remake. I feel like the remake is very, very clever in how it utilizes the original kind of to like weave its own story together of like a forgotten victim that wasn't in the original. It expands upon a character that was kind of just a throwaway character in the original in Benjamin Ewing, and briefly makes you think that, oh, maybe they had the right guy. They didn't, but it kind of just adds him back into the fold, which is kind of fun. I will say I think I like the original a little bit better. I think like modern audiences would probably lean more towards the 2014 one because it is more visceral and in-your-face violent and gory. But I think the original is just a little bit more reserved, so the actual violence in the movie, when it pops up, just feels a little bit more shocking. But yeah, check those movies out. They're very underrated slashers. I don't see them talked about a lot, but they're honestly very effective. The original, I'm fairly certain, predates Halloween, and it has a lot of aspects to it that are in Halloween. So I don't know if John Carpenter was a fan or what. Next up, let's talk about The Prowler, folks. So the Prowler is... Let's see here. I have to scroll down to... Yeah, here we go. The Prowler, 1981. So, with The Prowler, it's another kind of like movie that opens very similarly, actually, to the original Town That Dreaded Sundown, which I thought was very interesting. But with The Prowler, you open with soldiers coming back from World War II. It's the 40s, all this stuff. And it's like, voiceover saying like the soldiers are super happy to be home, and they can't wait to get back to their lives, and some of them will have ever existing trauma that they'll have to deal with for the rest of their lives, all this stuff. But then we cut to a woman named Rose, and she is writing like a Dear John letter, and she's breaking up with a character we don't know yet, but you can deduce from this letter that he's going to be the killer, right? So she's writing a letter basically saying, I can't wait for you any longer. We have to break up. Like, I'm sorry. I'll always care about you and I'll always worry about you, but this isn't working for me anymore. And then it cuts to Rose at like a dance, and she's with her new boyfriend. They go off to, this kind of secluded gazebo to hook up, and then that's when we're introduced to the Prowler. He shows up with a pitchfork, and while they're kissing, he jams that pitchfork straight into their back, the boyfriend's back, and then he steps on it, and then it just plunges through the woman. So he kind of like impales them together, and then we get a time jump to the 80s, basically like 40 years later, and it's the first dance at the same location since that killing. Like, that killing put it into the dances, right? And that's when you're introduced to main character Pam and, the rest of the kind of supporting characters. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, the actual storyline of this movie kind of lacks. The kills are really good, but there's not really anything that stands out as being like different in terms of the storytelling. There's a dance. Kids start getting picked off in the dance, and, all kind of crescendos to Pam, in the sorority house at the very end, running from the killer, right? But why this movie is still talked about is because of the fucking fantastic kills in this film. There's a great sequence where couple is about to hook up. This guy sneaks up on this girl in the shower, and she's getting ready for the dance, but everyone else has already left for the dance. You kind of think it's the killer at first, but then when he opens the door, she screams, and she's like, oh my god, it's you. And then so she's like, or he goes, oh, are you going to invite me in? And she goes, well, how fast can you take off your clothes? And then he's like, well, start your stopwatch. And then he goes into the bedroom, starts to kind of take his clothes off, and he leans forward to take his shoes off, and then he leans back, and the Prowler's standing behind him. Now, this is the best kill in the movie, and one of my favorite kills in horror. Killer puts his hand over his mouth, right? And then he pulls out this, like, super long blade and plunges it into the top of his head. And then that's when most horror movies, that's the end of the kill. You get the knife plunging in, hard cut. It's the girl in the shower still cleaning herself, being like, are you going to join me? But this movie takes its time with its kills. It lingers and really puts the special effects to test, right? So you've got the knife in the guy's head, hand over his mouth, and he is just struggling. His eyes are closed, and blood is just cascading down his face. And really, really disturbing shot. But then you're like, oh my god, how could this get any worse? His eyes open up, and they're all white. Like, his eyes have completely rolled into the back of his head. But then the camera stays on the face even more. So now blood is still pouring down his face. He's kind of shaking, vibrating, whatever you want to say. But that shot of his eyes rolled back is terrifying. Oh, I love that kill. Then it cuts to the girl in the shower. She's like, are you coming? And then she opens the door, and then that's when the Prowler, has his pitchfork, and he impales her again, right? So he impales the girl, and then you see their bodies. They keep cutting back to their bodies throughout the movie, just hanging in this fucking shower, which I thought was really interesting. It's funny because the lead character Pam goes back to the house multiple times, and she's like, she even gets chased by the Prowler at one point, and then has the cop Christopher come back and help her look through the house. But they do the shittiest job at looking through this house because they don't look through the whole house. And there's this one room that I think 2 different times while they're walking through the house, the door is cracked and there's a light on, and the cop even looks at it, but then he walks by it both times. Later in the final sequence of the movie, it's revealed the killer's been in there the whole time. So it's just like, man, like, do your job better. You get I thought the band that performed at the dance was really, really funny. They kind of sound like your classic 80s like hair metal band, but like they're just playing songs that are like, it's weird to have at a school dance, but they fit the tone of the movie. Like there's one song that they're singing about just like, let the blood flow, let the blood cascade, like all this stuff. And then it's just like, why are you singing this to a bunch of kids? But then it's cut with murders happening. So you're like, okay, I guess this makes sense. Now, as the movie kind of progresses, you have your one character who's just trying to have sex with everyone. She goes off to a pool. And that's when the Prowler shows up, she's getting out of the pool, he kicks her back in, and then you get another kind of like great like Jason jumping out of the water moment where she's like looking around, she can't see him, so she goes to like swim up and try to get out of the pool, and then he jumps up behind her and then just starts like slitting her throat. And again, the violence is just like really, really well done in this movie. But yeah, at one point, the cop, Christopher, tries to get a hold of the sheriff who is away, and he can't get a hold of him. Surprise, surprise, when they finally reveal the killer at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, here's your chance to pause, it was the sheriff. Shocker. Why is it always the cops? I thought that was interesting. I watched 2 different horror movies, and I was like, oh, same twist. Isn't that funny? So yeah, you've got the cop, the sheriff that they're trying to find the whole movie ends up being the killer. But again, when the movie kind of like, ends, they do the final sequence, the killer is, taken out, he gets shot to death, and then beaten to death, because after he gets shot, He gets shot, and then Pam kind of leans up and has this like moment where she's like locking eyes with the guy who saved her, and they have this like little cheesy like 80s moment, piano's kind of playing in the background, and then the killer leans up, pulls out a double barrel, and just blows the guy's head off, and then that's when Pam finishes the job on him. But yeah, so it cuts. She is being driven back to the house. I guess she is coming back from the hospital. It's the end of the movie. And she is walking into the sorority house. She goes up to her room. And then she goes into the shower, and the 2 bodies are still there. She screams, roll credits. How did they not find these bodies? It's been the next day. You think there would be some sort of, like, crime scene or whatever. The fact that the bodies were still there, again, just hammers down. I'm like, none of this quite makes any sense. Why are people not searching through this house? Like, were people not looking for those 2 characters? Because, like, the dance has been over. You think they're probably checking heads off. Like, okay, like, we found these bodies, so these guys are accounted for. These people are alive. Where are these 2 people? They never even looked through the house. So, again, like, I have a suspension of disbelief with a lot of movies. The kills are fucking fantastic in this one, but from a storytelling standpoint, it's kind of weak, in my opinion. But yeah, that is The Prowler, folks. Definitely check it out. It's another Tom Savini one. We talked about Maniac last week, and I just love Tom Savini and his eye for violence. It's very good. Very, very much enjoyed it. Next up, we're probably going to be talking about the most psychological horror film of the episode. Film from Kiyoshi Kurosawa, Akira Kurosawa's son. I believe he also directed that movie Pulse that got a 2004 remake with Kirsten Bell. But he directed the original one. So believe this is Japanese horror. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But, yeah. So, the movie Cure kind of follows a detective named Takabe, and he is trying to solve a group of killings. Now, the killings are all completely at random. You never know who's going to do it, but the thing that makes them all connected is the bodies are always found killed in the very same way. They're, bludgeoned to death, and then they have an X slashed into their throat. And the people that do it are always people that never showed signs of any aggression. Like, everyone's always like, oh my God, this came out of nowhere. Like, I can't believe they did this. And so they're kind of trying to figure out why all these people are randomly killing their spouses, their coworkers, but in the same fashion. Like, so the detective starts working on his theories. Like, are people being forced to do this? Is there someone else in the room with them? That is when, the detective's kind of doing his detective work. He's got the bulletin board with all the bodies, trying to figure it out. But then you start getting these scenes with this random kind of confused stranger. The first scene we see him on, he's on a beach. And he walks up to this guy sitting on the beach, and he's like, hey, where am I? And the guy tells him where he is. And he goes, well, where is that? And he's like, I just told you that. And he's just like, what is your name? And he tells him his name, and then he just keeps walking, and the guy goes up to him. He's like, do you need some help? And then it cuts to him bringing this random stranger back to his apartment. And that's when the guy keeps asking him questions, the guy who owns the apartment. And this random stranger, his name, later on turns out to be, I think it's Mariyama is how it's pronounced. He keeps asking Mariyama questions, but Mariyama only responds with questions to him. I don't think Mariyama answers a question this entire movie, and I think all his lines of dialogue are questions, for the most part. And so he keeps asking him all these questions, Mariyama, to the stranger who brought him back to his apartment, and then you see him pull out this lighter, and it's almost like the lighter hypnotizes the guy. And that's when you get a hard cut to, the detective gets a call, and he's, goes over to his apartment, and then you see the stranger who had invited Mariyama into his house, he jumps out of his window, and his wife has been brutally murdered. So, same fashion, X slashed into the neck. So, they start interrogating this guy, because he's alive even though he jumped out of his apartment building. They start interrogating him, and the guy's like, I don't remember anything, and they're like, but you remember killing her? And he's like, yes. And they're like, why did you do it? And he's like, it felt like the right thing to do at the time. And then he starts crying, and then they end their questioning because he's just too hysterical. And then that's when you see Mariyama. A cop is walking by, just on a city street. He sees Mariyama up on a roof, and he's like, hey, you got to get down from there. You're going to get hurt. He goes up to the roof to kind of get Mariyama. Mariyama jumps off the roof, and then that's when it cuts to the cop having him back at, his little, kind of police station. And he's kind of questioning him. He's like, what is your name? He's like, what is your name? And he's like, I'm asking the questions, what is your name? And that's the thing, Mariyama's like, where am I? He's like, you're at the police station. And he goes, where is that? And the cop's like, I just told you that. There's a lot of sequences in this movie that make me feel like Mariyama could easily be subbed out for, James Franco's character from Pineapple Express, because the way he just asks the same questions over again really made me think back to the scene in Pineapple Express where Seth Rogen's like, the battery's dead. And James Franco's like, what do you mean the battery's dead? And he's like, the battery's dead. And he goes, what do you mean the battery's dead? That's kind of how Mariyama talks throughout this whole movie. He'll ask a question, it gets answered, and he'll ask the same question. He's like, who are you? I'm a detective. Who are you? I just told you that. Yeah, but who are you? He just keeps asking these same questions over and over again. But similar to The Town That Dreaded Sundown and how they show you gradually throughout the movie the killer's kind of process, they do this with Mariyama, because with the cop here, where the last scene with the guy who jumps out of his apartment building, once he pulls the lighter out, the scene kind of ends. Now Mariyama's asking him all these questions, and then when he pulls the lighter out, you see the cop kind of like staring at it, and then like Mariyama, that's where it kind of clicked for me that Mariyama is hypnotizing these people. He's using like hypnotic suggestion to like kind of get these people to commit these kind of heinous acts. Now, you've got the cop staring at the lighter. He's all perplexed by it, and then that is when you kind of cut to Mariyama. He's being transferred to this hospital, but he's already burrowed his way inside this cop's mind, because as you'll see in a few scenes later, the cop is, just going about his business at the police station. His coworkers kind of like walking, back and forth around him. And then he walks out of the police station and he's like, all right, I'm going to go out on my patrol. And then you see the cop come out and he just like is staring at his coworker. He pulls out a gun, shoots him in the back of the head. Body falls. Puts the gun back. You see him turn around, walk back into the police station, and then he like picks up like a box cutter and he walks up to the body and he extends the knife out. And he stares at it. And he kind of like nods his head like, that'll do. And then he puts, retracts it, puts it in his pocket, and he starts dragging the body back into the police station. And I liked that scene a lot, because with what we've seen in the movie so far, when he like extends that knife and stares at the body and then starts to drag it back, we know exactly what he's going to do to that body. Like, he's going to start cutting it up, right? This is, we kind of go back and forth between Mariyama, like, hypnotizing people to do these terrible acts, with the detective and him kind of dealing with his own problems. He's got a wife who's very clearly mentally ill, and he'll come home and she's not there, and then he finds her wandering the streets and she's all confused. So he's kind of, got this extra burden of kind of, like, taking care of his mentally ill wife. When the detective goes to Takabe, the detective goes to interview this cop who has just been found killing his other coworker. He is interviewing him, and then that's when like he kind of like starts to be like, maybe people are hypnotizing them. He kind of like lands on that by like reading some books in the library on like hypnosis, and his partner kind of tells him, he's like, I don't know if it could be hypnosis, because if you hypnotize someone, you can get them to do things. But if you try to get them to do something that's morally wrong, that they would never do, like that's something that's against their morals, they won't do it. But he utilizes this kind of flashlight when he's interviewing this cop and kind of flashes it in his eyes, and it works. You see it like hypnotize the guy again, and then the guy starts being like, yeah, maybe there was someone else in the room with me. And then like he keeps kind of avoiding questions, but starts like kind of answering them more. And then you see him kind of like sit back and he's like, I'm thirsty. And then they're like, go get some water. There's a water station behind him. He goes to get some water. He drinks the water, and then you see him waltz over to this, holding cell, guy who's just standing in the corner while the two cops are interrogating him. And then the cops are looking at him, and then the holding cell guy starts to kind of like try to like reach out to stop him from coming forward to him, and they like, wave at him and like, don't do anything. And he walks up to the guy, and then you see he doesn't have anything in his hands, but he walks up to the guy, and then he just starts carving an X with his like fingers across his uniform. And then he goes and he sits back down, and then the cops are like, what were you just doing? And he's like, I don't remember. And then you're just like, okay, that's when you're like, yeah, this guy is hypnotizing people to commit these heinous acts. Now next, they still have, no idea where Mariyama is at this point, but he is at a hospital, and he's being he's in this like intake process with this doctor, and she's kind of like assessing his damage, seeing if he's mentally ill, kind of like running blood work on him. And that's when he starts to hypnotize her. This is probably my favorite hypnotizing victim of the movie because it leads to one of the more brutal kills. So far with the movie, like, there's not any, like, serious brutal violence. You get some, like, bludgeonings and, like, the shot to the, the gunshot to the head, and then you see blood kind of, like, pooling around the guy. But there is no, like, serious raw violence so far. It's all, like I said, very psychological. But when Mariyama hypnotizes this doctor, he goes down this tangent, and he starts talking to her, and he's like, so what was it like going through medical school? And then she kind of starts talking about how it was very hard being a woman going through medical school because everyone expected her to be a housewife and no one gave her the time of day, all this stuff. And then he's like, and the first time you saw a naked body, it was a corpse, correct? And she's like, yes. And he's just like, and I bet when you were carving into that corpse, you really wished you were carving into a man, someone like a man who had been wronging you. And then she doesn't say anything, and then that kind of like delves deeper to where, like, it leans back to where the guy was saying, yeah, you can't get someone to do anything they think is morally wrong. But then you see Mariyama kind of like trying to bring out these like angry tendencies out of these people before he does the hypnotizing. Like, he's like, remember the people that wronged you and remember what you wanted to do to them. Now, hey, go do this. Like, so it seems like it's part of his plan to kind of bypass that moral aspect of hypnosis. The next time we see this doctor, a guy is walking into a men's bathroom, and you see her on the floor carving up this random-ass person. And the guy is just like, oh, and he runs away. But after he runs away, the camera sticks with her, and then you get the grossest scene in this movie where she's peeling back his face. And the special effects in the scene are fantastic because you get, like, when she peels back his face, you see the teeth, the jaw, the tendons, all of it. So it's very, very well put together in a way that makes you squirm. And with how reserved the violence is, so far, you get, like, random, like, glimpses of wounds and gashes and pools of blood, but you don't see people peeling faces off. And I think this is, like, 45 minutes or so into the movie, maybe even an hour. So, yeah, definitely one of the more kind of gruesome scenes. So that is when, after this happens, they finally track down Mariyama. He's in the hospital. Our detective Takabe kind of goes and they arrest him. And when they're interrogating him, he kind of starts to aggravate the detective, because as the detective Takabe is interviewing Mariyama, Mariyama just keeps asking him questions and refuses to answer questions. And you see the detective Takabe is just getting furious at this. Like, he's like, answer my questions. And he just keeps getting more questions in response. And then that is when his partner kind of is like, I don't think you should talk to this guy. And his partner is also kind of like a psychologist type character. So he is kind of well versed in hypnosis, and he's like, I think it's dangerous. Like, we don't, like, he's getting these people to do these things. I think it's dangerous for you to continue these conversations with him. Takabe kind of like disregards that. He does at one point go and he finds out where Mariyama lived, and he goes and investigates his apartment, finds all these psychology books, and finds out that he was a psychology major who dropped out after he learned about a specific form of hypnosis called, like, mesmer. And there's something about when he reads that passage of the mesmer book, that's when you see Takabe's character kind of, like, change. And the rest of the movie, you're like, oh, he's hypnotized. Like, there's something's wrong with him. So you see, like, as he's kind of like, reading this book and all the stuff, you get flashes of his wife, like, at home. And then, like, you get flashes, like, glimpses of, like, the ceiling fan with, like, a rope or a cord on it. And then he like runs home, and then he finds his wife hanging by a ceiling fan, and he starts like, he's on his knees and he's crying, and it's a really gruesome shot because he's crying and his wife has hung herself and she's hanging there. And the shot really hangs for, I want to say, like 30, 45 seconds of her just body hanging and him crying. And then it cuts to her in the kitchen cooking food, and she's like, what's wrong? What's wrong with you? And then it's revealed that the whole thing was a hallucination. When he goes back to talk to Mariyama starts asking him about the hallucinations. And he's like, you saw your wife dead, yes? And like all this stuff. So you're like, Mariyama knows that this guy is completely hypnotized at this point. Later on, we see his partner, Takabe's partner, go to that same apartment, read that same passage about the Mesmer book. And the next time we actually don't see him again. Next time we hear about him, Takabe is called to his apartment, and all you see is blood all over the floor and a handcuff like on like a railing, right? And it's revealed that he had killed himself and like slashed the X into his own body. So the very dangerous psychological texts that these guys are dealing with. That is when Mariyama kind of like escapes the where he's being held. Takabe tracks him down to a little warehouse, and Mariyama starts giving him the speech like, "Oh, you're fascinating, like everything that you're doing, like it's going perfectly." And then you feel like he's going to keep going and talking, but then Takabe shoots him to death and kind of just empties the clip into him, all that. You get some great sequences before that, though, when he's talking to Mariyama about his wife, and you see almost like, you're like, this Mariyama is trying to burrow into this guy to get him to kill his wife, because he's like, your wife is a burden to you, isn't she? And then Takabe's like, yes, she is a burden to me, and like, if she wasn't sick, my life would be so much easier. And that's when you're like, oh bro, you're walking the line here, you're gonna kill your wife. But after he kills Mariyama, he goes, to this cafe that you see him at once earlier in the movie, and the waitress kind of walks up to him and is pouring him coffee, and she's like, "Yeah, oh, can I get you some more drink or some more water?" And he goes, "Yes, please." And then she goes to the counter, she's getting him some more beverage, and then her, I guess, manager walks up to her and kind of whispers something in her ear. And then after that, you see her posture straighten up. Manager walks away, and then she just walks very calmly over to a bar, the bar in the restaurant, and she picks up this massive kitchen knife, and then she starts walking back across the restaurant. And the movie ends on that. So Mariyama is dead. Honestly, like, I'm gonna have to watch this movie like a few more times. I just watched it the other day, and it felt like, as I was watching it, that this is a movie that begs to be watched multiple times. There's a lot of things happening with lights in this movie, whether it be the lighter that Mariyama is using to hypnotize people, or as he's walking through like that guy's apartment that he hypnotizes first, he keeps turning the lamps on and off, almost as if that's another way to hypnotize him. But the movie uses lights very, very well. Something like when lights are turned off and when lights are turned on, they're doing something with these characters. So, yeah, there's definitely a lot more at play. And I'll be honest, I don't understand the ending yet, but there is a reason for everything in this movie. So while it might be a little bit confusing at first, I think as I watch this movie more, I'm probably going to do another, maybe a deeper episode on it, because there's so much to it. But yeah, was very, very pleased. The direction was really good. The filming of, the victims, that face peel scene, that close up as she pulls the skin off. You get really good sequences down long corridors when like the cops are going in and out of like the police headquarters. And yeah, it just really exudes that kind of like, feels like a modern day noir detective movie. But yeah, really, really enjoyed it. I would say for the movies we talked about today, if you are going for more slasher vibe, obviously you're going to want to go. I think the best one of the bunch is, from a storytelling standpoint, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, the first one. But definitely watch the second one too, because they definitely pair really well together. It was the first time I'd ever watched them back to back, and it felt like a really good double feature. Like I said with The Prowler, the storytelling in that movie is not great from my point of view, but the kills are fantastic. So if you're going for kills and you could give a shit about the story, The Prowler is probably the best one. But if you want a movie that has a lot going on, that begs to be watched multiple times, that is asking really big questions, that is doing a lot of things in the background of certain scenes that feel very important and like they have a lot of meaning, a movie with a little more meat to it, so to speak. The Cure, absolutely, is a fantastic choice. Like I said, I probably haven't even done it a whole lot of justice because I just watched it. I feel like this movie is going to be one that second, that third, that fourth, maybe even every viewing that I watch of it, I'm going to pick up something new from it, because the way he hypnotizes people feels so complex and like there's so many moving parts to it. But yeah, this has been another episode of the Gory Hole. Thank you for listening to my rants, my good people. Tonight, going on a little bar crawl across Seattle. We're going to go to Great Notion, drink some of their Halloween beer. We're going to go to a really dope pizza bar named Supreme. I am obviously Art the Clown, Santa Claus edition. My girlfriend is dressed up as Frankenhooker from Frankenlotter's Frankenhooker. Which shout out to her. She doesn't love horror movies, but I showed her Frankenhooker and she got really into that one. So, yeah. And then we're going to go to a Grand Illusion. They're showing Hellraiser on 35 millimeter. So that'll be fun to watch that movie on film for the first time. She's also never seen it, and she doesn't do good with violent movies. So, we're just going to cross that bridge when we get there, honestly. But yeah, I think, next week's episode, we're going to talk about Just Before Dawn, Blood Rage, and I want to do a discussion about The Wailing as well, but I'm still kind of workshopping that, so there might be some newer movies that kind of get thrown into the mix, if you will. But yeah, super happy to be dressed up on this festive Halloween. I hope y'all are having a really killer Halloween yourself. Go out, do something spooky, eat some candy, yeah, just have a blast, because tomorrow's November 1st and Mariah Carey is upon us. She's coming, folks, and there's nothing we can do to escape it. The only thing that we can do is live in the moment and enjoy the last few hours of safety we have before Mariah Carey descends upon our psyche. This has been Zach with the Gory Hole, and I look forward to seeing y'all next week. Have a great Halloween.